Drugs and Qigong. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So this came up as a topic of interest amongst some of the long white cloud Qigong instructors. One person in particular raised it because they were finding that quite a few of people who they were working with had an interest in the use of a variety of different psychoactive drugs. And so she was curious about how that might fit in or not fit in with Qigong practice. And when that topic was raised, quite a few other people chimed in with their thoughts and opinions on the matter. And I thought maybe that would make this an interesting topic for one of these vlogs. So when I say drugs, I'm talking specifically about psychoactive drugs. There's a wide variety of these that are out there that some people use, some of which come from natural sources, some of which are synthetic. But I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of each of those individual drugs or substances and the way that they affect you, but just broadly, they have a significant effect on the functioning of your mind and how this relates to Qigong practice. So there are a variety of reasons why people take these psychoactive substances. And look, you can't deny that for a lot of people, really, it's just a way to get high, and have an extraordinary experience and perhaps escape from their normal experience of their day-to-day life. But there are also people who look to these sorts of substances for other reasons. And maybe with some similarity in terms of it's a way to access something outside their normal day-to-day life. But for example, they might look to use these substances as a way to develop their perception in a way beyond their normal experience. As part of that, they might use these substances as a way to have a greater sense of connection with other people and with the world around them. They might also look to these substances perhaps as a way that they can work through and resolve a variety of emotional traumas that they might have experienced, and so on. So there's a whole lot of reasons why some people look to these sorts of substances that you can think of as quite positive. And then at the same time, if you look at some of the benefits that we can get from Qigong, as well as, obvious physical benefits, certainly if you think of those things that I just listed, developing our perception beyond what we might normally perceive, that's definitely something that we can get from our Qigong practice. Developing a greater sense of connection with the world around us, and then also working through emotional traumas and experiences that we may have. These are all things that we can also get from Qigong. And so it's quite understandable why there's this crossover between people interested in the use of these psychoactive substances and also people who are interested in Qigong, because they might actually be seeking the same things in some way. And that can lead some people to think, well, maybe using these two things together would be a good idea because, they'll just reinforce each other, you'll have a stronger effect, and maybe you'll get to what it is that you're wanting to get out of what you're doing more quickly, more easily. And that might be true in some circumstances, but there's this issue where when we go too fast, too strong towards something, that often means that there's more risk involved as well. In the same way, driving your car at a moderate speed, there's always some risk that, there could be an accident or something like that. But if you drive really, really fast at 2 or 3 times the normal speed, there's more chance of an accident and there's more chance of serious harm from that accident. And I think that's not a bad analogy for some of the issues that can come from using psychoactive substances while doing Qigong. because they both do affect our mind in different ways, opening up pathways within the brain, within our perception. And if we do that too strongly, that's where we can have issues. We did have some discussion about this with the instructors in our instructor community. And, you know, one of the things I shared with them was that having been immersed in the world of Qigong for a long time at this point, I've come across many people who've had different experiences with Qigong. And for the most part, Qigong is extremely safe. As long as you're doing your practice in a balanced, moderate way, it's extremely safe. There's very low risk of any serious ill consequences from your Qigong practice. There's always some risk, because there's risk in everything we do. There's a risk in walking down the street, you know. There's a risk in eating your breakfast in the morning that you could maybe choke. Like, there's always some risk, and so it's helpful to be aware of whatever those risks are. But overall, Qigong is extremely safe. Now, because I've been around so many people with a deep interest in Qigong over a long period of time, I have, amongst that, come across people who have suffered significant harm from their Qigong practice. But as I think about those people who have suffered significant harm, none of them were practicing their Qigong in just a healthy, moderate, balanced way, just seeking health and well-being from their practice. They all fall into two categories, the ones who had significant harm. One, either possibly they were seeking some kind of supernatural experience or power or ability from their practice. And I've talked about this in previous vlogs, and that has led some people I've met to serious ill consequences, both physically and mentally, where because of that they've pushed through any manner of warning signs and done themselves harm. The other group who've done themselves harm through their Qigong practice were those who took psychoactive substances while practicing Qigong, and the effect was too strong. Again, they tried to speed the process up too much, and it led to serious harm. For them, mainly more psychological than physical, but serious, significant consequences. And so when I think of those who've experienced serious harm from their Qigong practice, none of them were just practicing Qigong in a healthy, balanced way. It was always one of these factors coming in that then pushed it over the edge. So from that point of view, as well as just on a principled point of view, I think it's very ill-advised to combine use of psychoactive substances with Qigong practice. Now, none of this is a judgment on people who may choose to use those substances for whatever their reasons are. There are potentially positive benefits that can come from their use, particularly if that's done in a way with, you know, supervision, with skilled, experienced supervision who can help to make sure that it's done in a healthy way. But combining this with Qigong practice adds a much higher level of potential risk, and so my recommendation would be to avoid it. For people who, for whatever reason, do want to use both psychoactive substances and also practice Qigong, my recommendation would be, well, one thing, in the short term at least, keep your use of those substances well separated from your Qigong practice. Treat them as separate things and keep them away from each other. And then you might also want to look at, well, what are my motivations for this? Why do I want to use both these things? Do I need to use both of these methods, both of these tools towards that aim? Quite aside from the risk of using them both together, using those substances, and it's relying on something external to yourself to gain that effect. And again, I'm not saying that that's not valid for some people, but Qigong gives us another way to develop many of those same things, as we've talked about. In many instances, it will be slower, but you're developing that skill within yourself. You're relying on yourself, and it will be something that you can do more safely because it's slower. When we develop things more slowly, it tends to be more safe. And as such, it will also be something that will be replicable for you. You'll be able to develop that skill and come back to it again and again and again. And I think overall, certainly for me, I feel like that's a healthier approach to things. Again, people can have their different ways that they want to do things, but I feel like that's a healthier, more sustainable way to develop that awareness, develop that connection, and also to work through, again, whatever emotional issues or traumas you may have as well. Further to that, for myself, as I think about, my personal attitude to the use of these sorts of substances, again, I have no problem with people doing what they want to do as long as they're not hurting anyone else or causing any problems for anyone else. But for myself, I would be very concerned if I were to use those sorts of substances, that because they can have sometimes quite a strong effect, that can maybe push things too far and so on, that I may then actually jeopardize what I have already been able to do and continue to be able to do and continue to develop within my Qigong practice. And I simply wouldn't want to risk that, because I find my Qigong practice so fulfilling in its own right. I wouldn't want something to possibly interfere with that. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the matter. Again, none of this is meant as any judgment of people who choose to do things differently. Perhaps a good caution for some people, though, to recognize, the nature of what's going on here, and that you can expose yourself to some serious risk of harm by combining these things together. In the end, people are going to make their own decisions, though. But anyway, I hope it's been maybe helpful, useful for at least someone watching this. And I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.